Okay, so now it's time to bring this guy into Mudbox and maybe do some detailing, sculpting, and then actually texturing the character. So I'm just going to click on. I'm going to bring these in one at a time, just kind of make it easier on me as I'm working. So I'm just going to click on that guy. I want to make sure that my history has been deleted, and I want to make sure my transforms have been frozen. So once I've done that, then I can just go to File, Send to Mudbox, and I'll just click Send as New Scene. And then you'll notice that this little green thing pops up connected to Mudbox. And I'm going to get a few errors here. I'm not going to worry too much about them. Degenerated faces, that basically means that there's some corners that are basically like a straight line. So that's not one you really need to worry about. So I'm just going to hit Keep That Mesh. And it'll show me where those errors are. And if I turn my wireframe on and zoom in here, you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. So see how that is a straight line? So it's just recognizing that as an error, which it's really not an error. But I can turn that off, that red display off, just by going to Display Mesh Errors, and then that will be turned off. So Mudbox is pretty simple to learn. It's not anything complicated. I always say if you know Maya, you could probably figure out Mudbox pretty easily. The one thing that I do whenever I come into Mudbox for the first time is I change a hotkey. The reason I change the hotkey is because by default, Mudbox wants you to use, your Alt, rotate, middle mouse, pans, and right-click zooms. But if you're using a tablet, which is pretty integral to using Mudbox, you don't have a middle mouse click. So what I do is I come up to Window, Hotkeys, and I come down to Pan. And by default, this is set to, let me go ahead and change this to what it is by default. So by default, it's middle mouse button. You have to do this in a certain order or it's not going to work. So by default, it's Alt, middle mouse button. Oops, I was clicking on the wrong guy there. Let me restore Mudbox defaults. So that'll let us see what it is by default anyway. So come all the way down to Pan. So by default, it's Alt, middle mouse button. And we don't really have a middle mouse button on our tablet. So you have to do this in the correct order or it'll try to overwrite a already existing hotkey. So what I do is I uncheck middle mouse button, I check Shift, and then I check left mouse button. And this will basically, if I want to pan, I just hold down Alt and Shift, and then I can click and drag, and that will pan. So Alt, top pin button is zoom in and out. Alt, clicking and dragging is rotating, and Alt Shift is pan. So that makes it a little bit easier. And that's just one of the first things that I kind of change in Mudbox. So let's switch over to our sculpting tools real quick before we get into actually painting. I have the wireframe on. You can hit W and that will toggle your wireframe on and off. And come over here to your object list. And you'll see here that you have a few things. We have the body that was brought in. We also have the blend that was brought in from Maya as well. What we can do is assign our default material to our object. And some of these things are just easier to do with a mouse. It'll let me. Let's try. Assign existing material, and I'm just holding down the space bar to get this menu, and I click and hold there, assign existing material, default material. So now we have, now we have our default material on here. Now he's yellow because I have him selected. So to deselect him, I can just Control D, and that will deselect him. Now to actually move up in subdivision levels, to move up and down, you're going to hit your page up and page down keys. So we'll see right now we don't have any. We're at level 0 and we're right under 10,000 polygons. So that's pretty good. So in order to subdivide, to have more geometry to work with and sculpt with, I'm going to hit Shift D. And that will subdivide our mesh. So now we have about 20,000. If I hit my wireframe, you'll see that that's subdivided. Because our guy is pretty much already sculpted out and already modeled out, the only really thing I'm going to sculpt in here is some really fine detail. So obviously if I were modeling this guy in Mudbox, I wouldn't do this. But in this case where I'm jumping to modeling some high definition or high frequency detail, I'm just going to go ahead and subdivide a couple more times. So we have at this point just over 1 million polygons, and that should give us what we want. So I'm going to sculpt some eyebrows on this guy, and I want to do it on a layer so I don't mess up what I actually have here. So I'm going to switch over to my layers tab here, and I'm just going to add a new layer, and I'll call this layer brows. And I made a mistake here. We're in our paint layer. We want to be in our sculpt layers. So I'm in sculpt. I'm going to make a new layer. And that's fine, just named sculpt layer 1. I can always double click it and rename it to brows. So let's start out with just the sculpt tool by itself. I want to make sure that I have mirror local X turned on, so whatever I do on one side gets done to the other side. So I can hold down my B key to change my brush size, and I can hold down my M key to change my magnitude or my strength. So I can just do something like that, and you'll start to see kind of what's going to happen there. I don't like that. I'm going to Control Z, undo that. Also, because it's on a layer, I can come over here and choose my erase brush. And because I have that on a layer, it's going to erase everything that I've done there. So I think what I want to do here, I'm going to switch back to my sculpt tool, and I'm going to choose this fall off here. Maybe make my brush a little bit bigger and a lot lower magnitude. And I'm going to try something like that. And I have my concept art here so I can kind of see what I'm doing there. So let's make it the brush a little bit bigger and the magnitude a little bit less. Another really cool feature in Mudbox when it comes to sculpting is that I have a steady stroke. Currently my steady stroke is set to 0. If I increase that, what you'll see is as I drag off, it gives me kind of allows me to make some more fluid strokes. So let's make that something like 3. And then I can try a few different variations of eyebrow shape. Until I have something that I kind of like as far as the shape goes. So maybe something like that. Let's zoom in a little bit here. And then I can come in and let's grab this sharp fall off and get a much smaller brush. Oops. Let me shut down my Facebook. And we can turn off our steady stroke and maybe just try to sculpt in some hair detail in there. So even now I can see that I could probably get away with using an extra subdivision level to kind of get a little bit more detail. So maybe I'll Shift D one more time, bump that up. The more subdivision levels you get, now we're up to 5 million polygons. Obviously, the more you get, the more taxing it's going to be on your computer. And basically what happened here is because we did that on a lower subdivision level, we did that on a layer, we can't sculpt on that higher layer or that higher subdivision level on this layer. So what I would actually need to do at this point is jump up to that other layer or that other subdivision level, and then I can make a new layer and I can actually sculpt. But you'll see now that it's kind of being a little bit more taxing as far as my resources. On my computer. But I think something like that is good for the eyebrows. Even they may even be a little thick for my taste. I can go in again with my eraser and erase some of that detail. Maybe I'll jump down a level and erase some of that detail on this layer. And try to thin those out a little bit. But I think that's good enough. That'll look okay once we start texturing it. Now, say I want to do something like add a little bit of detail to the face. If I want to come in and do a little bit more sculpting, maybe I'll add another sculpt layer here just to kind of play around with some things, play around with different brushes. I'll use that sharp one here. Maybe I'll try to get some wrinkles going on. And if I hold down Control, so you'll notice that as I'm sculpting, it's pulling out. If I hold down Control, it will push in. And that little skipping, that little dotted line you see is going to be over here in our stamp spacing. So if I decrease that down to 0, we're going to get a much smoother line. So that's what I want. So I'm going to come in here and just kind of work on some of these details a little bit, maybe. And generally the way I like to work is I kind of over exaggerate the detail that I want, and then I'll hold down Shift and smooth it out. For something like this, my pinch tool would be really good. So to kind of pinch that together a little bit. So if you want to add extra details to your character, this is a good opportunity to do that right here in Mudbox. And then say I want to do something like maybe add some pores to the face. So let's grab our sculpt. We'll grab our sculpt brush, and let's go over here to stencil, and let's look at some stencil options that we have. So we have that kind of mimics skin a little bit. And that might be good for something like pores. So let's try this one and see how it looks. So I'm going to grab my sculpt brush, and for this I'm going to go over to my fall off, and I'm going to do just a soft fall off like that. And we'll do a bigger brush size. Oops. Bigger brush size, much really low magnitude, and I'm going to hold down Control to push those in instead of pull them out. So you'll see that that works, you know, as far as pores go. Obviously we don't want pores all over the whole face, and because we're doing this on a layer, we can drop the sort of visibility of it down a little bit whenever we're done. So right now he looks kind of scaly. So it's probably something that we don't want. And then I can just hit Q to turn that visibility off. And then I can come up here to my layer now, and I can just drop down that strength on the layer. And then we just have a little bit of a nice texture there now, so we don't see those pores so much. And then if it's an area where it's a little strong and I want to ease back on it a little bit, again, I can just come in and grab my erase brush and sort of soften some of those out a little bit, just to give me a nice texture. Maybe deal with the work on the lips a little bit, maybe give them a little bit of a just a little bit of texture. And basically what we're doing this for is we can bake out a normal map when we're done, and this detail will show up with it. It'll look like this high poly detail, but then it won't actually have all that extra geometry. So this isn't an in-depth tutorial on how to use Mudbox. It's just kind of how to use Mudbox for our purposes. And I think as far as the sculpting on this guy goes, I think I'm pretty good. I won't do anything else unless maybe I want to like sculpt some wrinkles on the hand or something like that. But just to move along, I probably won't actually do that here. So yeah, so that's kind of a quick rundown of how to get your model into Mudbox and start doing some detailing. I think what I'm going to do at this point is bring in the shirt and the pants and maybe do some detailing in a time lapse on the shirt and pants, and then we'll move on to texturing. All right, so just real quick, when I brought the shirt in, I got an error. So I'm going to delete the shirt from my scene here. And what I did with the body is I just locked it by clicking right there to lock it. So I'm going to jump back to Maya and look at where that is a problem on our shirt and see if I can fix it. So looks like, so what I can do here is just move the shirt out a little bit. And so it looks like our problem is somewhere in here. So it looks like it's that guy right there. So that's an easy enough fix. I can just delete that vertice, and then I will zero out my transform so that shirt pops back into place. And now we'll try that again. So send to Mudbox, add to current scene. And now we don't have that error, so we can sculpt. So I'm going to just spacebar, assign existing default material to the shirt, and then I'll start sculpting. For the shirt, I think what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to keep symmetry on for some things, but I believe I'm eventually going to turn symmetry off. All right, so I think I have, I didn't want to get too detailed in the sculpting. He's a pretty stylized character, so he doesn't have a lot of fine detail or high frequency detail. I just kind of wanted to get his clothes to kind of look like they're a little bit more cloth like, where they have some wrinkles in them and things like that. So that's about it's about where I want to be with this character, sculpting wise. So next we'll go ahead and jump into texturing, and then we will eventually we'll extract the normal maps and put it all together. But in the next video, I'm just going to go over some skin texturing techniques. So I just hope you kind of paid attention to how I was sculpting. I go in and I'll over sculpt, and then I'll hold down my shift key to smooth those shapes out. And this isn't by any means the best sculpting I've done, but it is what it is. I just wanted something to kind of make it look like it's cloth basically, and not just we can kind of sculpt in a little bit of a seam there if I want. And again, this is not super important. A lot of this stuff is going to be, even if it is kind of sloppy, some of this stuff isn't going to be really visible in once we have textures and all that good stuff on it. So I'm not too concerned about the amount of detail going into this, but yeah, so next video will be all about texturing.